Hey, this is Trav here, and just a quick reminder that this podcast relies on the kindness of my Patreons, and I would like to thank the following people: Bill, Brendan, Grant, Lisa, Mog, Dan, and Paula. Your constant monthly donation really helps out, and if you can spare $1, the link to my Patreon is in the description. Anyway, thanks for listening. Here's the show. Hey, welcome to episode 163 of Tales from the Mind Boat, the slow-moving, fun-time boat ride inside the artificial waters and ambient honeycombs of my mind. This is Trav Nash speaking. Thank you very much for listening to this episode. I really do appreciate it. In today's episode is all about a pigeon, a coffee shop, and a strange crime scene of broken glass and a can of Woodstock. So it's a good show, and all you need to do is sit back, relax, think about where you'd be in 6 hours as we set sail. Steam rose in a parachute-like shape of grey and white wisps of fragile spiderwebs of steam and roasted beans from the coffee machine. I stood out the way from the people who had finished their lunch with friends and family, and as soon as they left their seats, another family almost identical as the last would shuffle in with excellent posture and overconfidence, who acted like royalty, who have decided to pretend to be a commoner to see how the lower class live, and sit around the newly available tables while the waitress scurries to clean the plates and cups from the last family. The noise in this room is almost deafening, a hot audio soup of people chatting loudly and trying to talk over everyone else around them, so their opinion and conversation gets the validation it deserves. The sound when you enter knocks you back, and it really doesn't take long until it begins to take shape, and you can clearly see the sound around you become a solid object, ever-growing and unidentifiable in shape, that is destined to engulf this entire room and everyone in it. This loud sonic tornado is a myriad of voices that's heavy until it rests inside your ear and temporarily muffles all the sound into a much more softer, more controlled sound, allowing you to think a little clearer. I don't really want to make eye contact with anyone. I just want the coffee I ordered and then to slip out unnoticed. The disconnect I have with these adults who have now become a similar age to myself, who have already surrounded themselves with children, prams and bags of diapers. I couldn't even imagine how stressful it must be to be responsible for another human being's life for the rest of your own. I struggle to accomplish the basic tasks that I would need to do in a day, let alone making sure a small, more fragile version of myself that would need even more attention and care. A table of cyclists that all sit around the table near the window, keep an eye on their bikes or leaning against each other, that has now become this obstacle on the sidewalk where young couples who walk hand in hand need to break their connection to go around. These cyclists are the loudest people in the room. Even with my newfound readjusted ears, their conversation pattern is almost composed like a song that goes verse, chorus. Someone would say a sentence with a maximum of 7 words, and the rest of the table will laugh, resetting the sequence again. This will go on in a circle about 7 times, and then someone else may say something a little longer than 7 words, and you can tell by looking at the expression and postures of those who are listening that they're not really listening at all, just waiting for the person to finish so they can nervously laugh as soon as there is an uncomfortable silence, or completely tune out altogether as they compose in their head what they want to say next. Although they all seem to know each other and look like they're in some club or gang or even some kind of cult, there is a distinct disconnect. There is nothing real about these groups of people who don't seem bonded by any other interest other than the wearing of tight fluoro lycra and cycling in packs together. Laughing erupts from 3 more tables almost simultaneously. One woman pulls back her chair that I can only assume is in case her sides split and her insides go spilling out onto the table in front of her. As she pushes herself back from the table, she pins one of the underpaid staff who are locked in that work mode that is evident by their blank stare that illustrates that they are somewhere else in their heads and nowhere near here. But without missing a beat, the waiter managed to keep hold of their 2 plates of food and twist and bend at the right times to avoid collision and make their way to the table of hungry people who received their lunch without any incident. It's a remarkable thing to watch, and I realised I was the only one who noticed it. The woman, who was still cackling like an old witch in a fairy tale, has no idea the chain of events that she would have contributed to. The waiter's expertise of avoiding this kind of incident must mean this happens a lot. I kind of feel like I should walk up to him and tell him how amazing it was, but I really don't want to wake him from wherever he really is. I just stand there, still waiting for my coffee, now looking at the stone floor that looks like an undiscovered galaxy of distant stars and supernovas. More people come in and walk all over my newfound personal part of space that I discovered and was now thinking of a name to make it official. The floor seems to move slightly as it's trying to avoid the feet that trample over it, and goes unnoticed like everything else in this cafe, except for someone like myself who stands to one corner out of the way of everyone just coexisting, as nobody in this room takes notice of anybody else. A young guy with hair that looks like a wave that is rolling back in reverse stands up abruptly and looks in my direction. He's wearing this powder blue blazer and pants that looks much too dressed up for someone who's just getting a coffee and some kind of toast that is smudged in avocado and egg. He comes towards me with strange intensity, and I wonder if he thinks he knows me, and if there's going to be some kind of awkward conversation that I will be forced to engage in. This guy clearly isn't anyone that I would be interested in talking to, or possibly know. He seems to be the exact opposite of where I'm at this point in my life. Not that I have ever really cared much about how I dress or my appearance in public, but this kind of guy looks like he gets up early to stare for hours at a vast collection of outfits and thinks hard about how his choices of clothes will alter the world's impression of himself and perhaps hide the empty void that he tries to conceal to others. He moves with unshaken confidence that still seems to be masking something uncertain, and I get the feeling nothing about this guy is what it seems. I find it hard to take something on face value, especially when it's so overly calculated and it's just plain pretend to be something it never really will. He moves in close now and brushes past my elbow, as if I wasn't there at all. This power move seems absolutely unnecessary and quite bizarre. I turned around to see what was so special about this specific corner of the room, and the only thing I can see was this newspaper that was behind me, with a front page photograph of a footballer kicking a football with his left leg fully raised almost above his own head, and his open mouth that looks like he's screaming in pain or agony as he might have pulled a groin muscle performing such a fantastic feat. This guy has pushed himself into position behind me in some kind of strange alpha move. Why he considered that I was in any way a threat to his well-manicured existence seems to be beyond all comprehension, and another mystery of the world that we'll never find out. He furiously turns the pages of the newspaper with such aggression it sounds like he's ripping the pages out of a phone book with every turn of the page. I start to realize that I'm strangely in tune to the strong frequency of insecurity and inferiority disorder, and I move away to the other side of the entrance, in a corner that is tucked away at the edge of one of the tables and where the doors open up to. I look behind me quickly to check that there are no more papers behind me, and thankfully there isn't. This guy reading the paper now turns back slightly, pretending not to look back at all smug smile now that is painted clearly on his face, like this seems to be the highlight of the year so far. He reached the end of the paper without reading any of its content, and I began to question if he can read it all. He now pulls out his phone, and I wonder if he realizes he can read all the latest news from an unlimited amount of news sources using the free Wi-Fi this cafe already supplies free of charge. He hits the phone like he's playing one of those mobile games where you pop balloons for points, and to little to no acclaim. He then raises the phone to his head and turns around to face the cafe in the exact same position I was standing, just more confident. as he begins a conversation with someone where few words are shared or even need to be said that don't involve no or yes, and that ever-reliable nervous chuckle to fill in the empty spaces where nobody or either end knows what to say next. As he's on the phone smiling and standing perfectly upright, it makes my back hurt, and his eyes scan the room with a desperate need for validation. But everyone in this room is too busy talking to those around their own table, fastening their child to a high chair, or searching through their handbag for their Visa card to even notice this guy. So I turn away and look out the entrance onto the intersection that is full of people leaving or heading into other cafes and stores that are on every corner. For today is a public holiday for Anzac Day, but for most of these people, it's just a chance to sleep in and get a coffee, and not have to worry about their day job, at least not until tomorrow morning. Children skip along with their family and purposely run into fences and mailboxes, making dramatic explosion sounds like they're in the middle of their own action film. Groups of people who just met stand on the corner holding their takeaway coffee cups and keep their dogs from sniffing each other's butts. Groups of teen moving packs of 8 or more, dressed in some kind of vintage 90s outfits that were the kind of clothing your parents would buy you if they couldn't afford the cool big name brand stuff you desperately desired to fit in with that cool clique. Cars almost run down any pedestrian who crosses the clearly marked crossing that has a pole with a big bright yellow sign of 2 legs walking across a pedestrian zebra crossing, exactly like the one these pedestrians are using. Flashing red lights that alternate between left and right draw more attention to the fact that not stopping could possibly hurt or even kill a pedestrian, but regardless of all these warning signs, cars speed through and narrowly miss running down a family of people who want to walk home with their coffees. Occasionally a car is forced to stop and a pedestrian and the driver lock eyes in disapproving expressions of disdain. The driver impatiently motions for them to hurry it along and will instantly go from 0 to 90 like they're trying to reach 88 miles per hour to go back in time so they can mow down anyone who gets in their way again. This kind of human behaviour depresses me, and I turn around now, away from the busy pedestrian crossing and its near fatalities, and now focus my attention on the small pigeon. The pigeon bravely uses the brief pauses of people entering or exiting the cafe to make a beeline for the now vacant entrance. The pigeon's feathers stick out in weird patches due to this newly chilling autumn wind, but still there are splatterings of green and blue speckles that stand out amongst the sea of different shades of grey. This pigeon reaches the doorframe, but then backs off a little and surveys the cafe and its deafening orchestra of chatter and clinking cutlery and coffee mugs. More steam rises from the coffee machine, and the pigeon jumps back a little, stretching its wingspan out fully now, like it's trying to catch itself from blowing onto the dangerous road behind. As this pigeon steadies itself again, it begins to move back and forth like someone trying to convince themselves to get over their anxiety and pass through the threshold of panic and anxiousness. I don't really know if pigeons can get anxiety or even panic attacks, but having seen this particular pigeon, I can only assume they do. This pigeon makes a heroic push forward, but stops itself just short of coming into the cafe and backs off a little. It then stands still for a second, twisting its head upwards, and I wonder what's going on, and then it drops a small slimy pigeon poop right in the middle of the entrance. I now realise this is what's making the pigeon move so strangely, and it now has become overly confident as it trots into the cafe, and nobody seems to notice at all. But I notice, and the pigeon notices me noticing, and we both look at each other suspiciously and wonder what the other is going to do next. I thought about shooing it out of the cafe, but then I kind of felt sorry for this anxious pigeon, and I wondered if it's so hungry that it's willing to put itself in a loud, dangerous room of noise and trampling human feet just to get a few crumbs of toast that has slipped off someone's plate as they slam their fist down in fits of overly dramatic laughter. This pigeon quickly weaves in and out of legs of other people sitting down at tables and chairs, and sits underneath the main table and finds a whole bounty of flaky, brittle pastry, and begins to make quick, cautious pecks at it constantly, while constantly scanning the room for any immediate danger. Imagine someone would notice this pigeon, and soon the whole place would be a rapture of panic and screeching, but nobody seems to notice, and I'm not really that surprised. Everyone is just too involved with their stories of their son's trip to Bali or their daughter that is now in their final year of their bachelor degree, or even that ex-husband who should be paying the child support that they are owed. This cafe carries on, and nobody really notices each other. They only snap out of their carefully cultivated friendship bubble when the waiter pleasantly places food and drink in front of them, and they thank them for their service as they unconsciously lock in to an impenetrable huddle again, and the conversation continues to blend into the many that whirl around the room, as soon it becomes unidentifiable chatter of different pitches of voices and reactions. Finally, my coffee is ready to go, and I get called to collect it and thank the guy behind the counter. The well-dressed man that was pretending to read the newspaper now scowls at me as I turn back around and finally get to leave this insulated room of loud chatter and roasted bean steam, while I try to avoid the pigeon shit that was right in the middle of the entrance. I head across the pedestrian crossing of Doom. I'm surprised that the expensive car actually stopped and is now waiting impatiently by my side. I take a sip from my coffee, and the dull headache that has been building in my skull since I got up today became a little bit more bearable with every sip. I began to head home and tried to avoid any direct line to the café district, as the sidewalk never seems wide enough for groups of people who refuse to move out of your way and let anybody they don't know pass, even if they are holding scalding hot cups of coffee. I turn down a little path next to the canal and narrowly avoid a cyclist riding so fast I naturally assume he was being chased by something terrifying, but nothing ever came. And I think that's because whatever it was must have gave up, and then I thought how lucky this cyclist was to escape and live another day. I cross over a footbridge over the canal, just behind where I live, and as I make it to the end there is a broken piece of footwear with an Australian flag printed on this thong. Scattered all around its broken glass in strange piles and ununiformed clusters. Blood seems to stain some of the back of this thong, staining our national flag, and smaller drops of blood now stain the grey concrete sidewalk. A can of Woodstock has been placed horizontally on the railing of the footbridge, and a sticky puddle of bourbon and cola makes a small puddle that almost swallows the front of the thong and the glass around it. I've no idea what happened here. More than likely nothing. Just someone making the most of not having to go to work this morning, and right now they are more than likely nursing a horrific hangover. But I like to find strange objects like this and come up with my own conclusion. Maybe two people are out drinking, moving in between two parties or two destinations. When they got to this footbridge it was too dark and not well lit, and one got their thongs stuck in a small gap of this wooden footbridge. The shock of this and their intoxication maybe made them trip or stumble, and they dropped the glass bottle they might have been holding. The other person was probably drinking the can of Woodstock and quickly put the can down and helped their friend up or steady them again. And when they did this, they probably couldn't free the thong, or managed to wedge it out but realized it was broken. So the person decided to just leave it behind, stepping onto the now broken glass and leaving their blood and the Australian pride behind them. Seems the most reasonable explanation, but who knows? This is a strange world full to the brim with strange people, and I'm constantly surprised how weird everything could become with every passing day. So that's it for another week. Thank you very much for listening to this episode. I really do appreciate it. And if you like this episode, well, there is over 160 episodes completely for free, ready to stream and download right now. And you can get this from Spotify, iTunes, the Libsyn page, or wherever you get your podcasts from. I highly recommend using some kind of podcast app and subscribing to this podcast, because that will keep you up to date as soon as a new episode drops, and you can keep all the episodes in a neat little list. Then that really helps out. Leaving a review on whatever you're listening to this really helps out, but best of all, just telling a friend or liking the Facebook page or the Twitter page and sharing this episode around would be really appreciated. That's probably the best way to get this out to people. You can follow my own Twitter account at Nashtopia, or you can follow my Instagram at Trav Nash Draw Stuff, where I draw a hand-drawn picture every day that sometimes I watercolor, and you can see the progression of style that I'm into at that point in time. Hey, the theme music for this podcast is pretty good, and it was composed by the one and only Tim Witt from Adelaide, and you can listen to his music right now just by going to SoundCloud and listening to Tim Witt Sounds. You can follow him on Bandcamp and get his albums and pay what you will for some ridiculously good music, just like the theme song to this podcast. If you can spare it, it's completely optional, but giving at least $1 to my Patreon account really gets this podcast going, and thank you very much to my various Patreon supporters, because you really keep this podcast going. So I guess that's it for another week. Thank you very much for listening to this episode. I'm off to the dentist again today, hopefully the last in a little while. And I hope you have a good week. I hope you're doing well. Until next week, stay safe, and as always, peace.